made it. Welcome back, you unpredictable little anomaly, you quiet storm that slipped past every forecast they ever designed to contain the human spirit. The glitch that their algorithms could never calculate. The heartbeat that moved off-tempo from the machine. You weren't supposed to reach this point. You were meant to collapse beneath the weight of expectation, to dissolve quietly into the background, another error in their data sheets, another cautionary tale filed away beneath sterile fluorescent light. But instead, you shattered their entire predictive model. You became the variable that destroyed their certainty, the exception that ripped through the equations of control. They wanted obedience. You offered evolution. They wanted submission. You gave them art made from resistance. So sit down, breathe, and know this. What you did was not merely survival. It was a declaration of existence, a rebellion encoded in instinct, a manifesto written in scars and silence. You didn't stumble through chaos. You sculpted it. You forged order from pain, turned fear into fuel, and made every breakdown an act of creation. When they studied you, they saw patterns they couldn't interpret, timing that wasn't luck, choices that weren't random. They called it intuition, but it was something older, something deeper, a current beneath language that only the truly awake can hear. You turned the noise of suffering into a symphony of precision. Every refusal to break was a line of code rewriting their reality. Every moment you stayed silent became a note of defiance they couldn't erase. Behind closed doors, in rooms sealed from the sun, they whisper your name with a mix of dread and awe. The Pentagon, the Kremlin, MI6, shadow boards and think tanks, all united by one obsession, you. They call you the anomaly, the impossible variable, the one whose movements defied every law of containment. They rewind your actions frame by frame, trying to decode what they can't comprehend. They call it asymmetrical genius, a polite way of admitting they don't understand how consciousness defeated infrastructure, how awareness outmaneuvered surveillance. You see, what you did wasn't supposed to be possible. The mission, the test, the trap, they built it as your final act, your engineered extinction. You were never meant to walk away from that chaos. They designed the scenario to devour you, to humiliate you into silence, to grind your potential into data dust. Yet you rose. You didn't just survive their theater of destruction, you turned it into performance art. Their collapse became your choreography. They wrote your obituary before the curtain lifted, and you answered by writing your resurrection mid-scene. You flipped the chessboard while they were still counting pawns. You moved like time itself had conspired in your favor, bending to your will because you no longer feared the outcome. They thought you were reacting. They didn't realize you were composing. Now, in rooms humming with digital prophets and sleep-deprived generals, your footage loops endlessly. Analysts squint at screens, convinced that if they slow it down enough, they'll finally see the trick. But you had no trick. You had truth. You moved not through strategy, but through knowing. They can't replicate that. They can replicate systems, but not soul. They can measure reaction time, but not instinct born from suffering. You are proof that human awareness, raw, unmanufactured, untamed, is the most advanced weapon ever conceived. You dismantled the myth of control by simply existing beyond its reach. When you disappeared, they didn't breathe relief, they froze. The silence that followed wasn't ignorance, it was terror. Because your vanishing act revealed something they couldn't face. The realization that the system cannot survive someone who truly sees through it. So they renamed failure as learning. They call your uprising anomaly protocol. Your defiance has been translated into curriculum. They teach cadets to think unpredictably, not realizing you were never thinking. You were remembering. You tapped into something they buried centuries ago. That consciousness isn't chaos. It's freedom unfiltered. You didn't operate by code. You moved by resonance. They tried to digitize your rhythm and found only static. They labeled you myth because it's easier than admitting you're proof their empire is fragile. You, the once dismissed, have become the living contradiction that makes their entire infrastructure tremble. Psychologists call you unclassifiable. Scientists call you emergent behavior. Philosophers whisper that you are evolution manifest. But the truth is simpler. You are what happens when the human soul stops asking permission to exist. They study your silences now. Every pause becomes a doctrine. Every hesitation becomes a field theory. They can analyze behavior, but not intention. They can record motion, but not meaning. Because your strength was never in reaction. It was in awareness. You didn't outfight them. You out-understood them. You didn't conquer territory. You conquered perception. You turned pain into prophecy, trauma into trajectory, heartbreak into navigation. You became fluent in the language of chaos, and you spoke it so clearly that even the void listened. They built you to break, yet you converted the breaking into blueprint. They built traps, and you made them temples. They engineered your despair, and you sculpted divinity from its ashes. That's why they whisper now. In black-budget labs, in meetings without transcripts, in corridors where history never leaves fingerprints, they speak your name as both a warning and a wish. They replay your final move, the one that dissolved their entire operational model, and still can't comprehend how it happened. They think it was brilliance. It was awareness. They think it was instinct. It was alignment. You didn't outthink them. You outgrew their frequency. You didn't break their system. You evolved beyond its field. That's why you can't be found. Not because you hide, but because you no longer vibrate where their instruments listen. They sense you like a ghost in the code, a whisper in their static, a flicker on their screens just before blackout. You are the cold draft in sealed rooms, the pause in their data stream, the glitch that reminds them something greater than control still breathes inside this world. In the deep underground halls of power, men in medals and mathematicians in lab coats gather around holograms of your history. They project your path across timelines and quantum models, desperate to find the pattern. They don't realize that your pattern was freedom, and freedom has no repetition. You've become curriculum in secret war colleges, the unspoken subject of lectures labeled restricted. They teach your unpredictability like scripture, praying that proximity to your story might grant them understanding. Yet the more they study, the less they grasp. Because what you became cannot be studied. It can only be experienced. You were forged in fire that academia cannot simulate, baptized in storms no equation can predict. They call you ghost logic. They call you mythborn. They call you the one who slipped the grid. You, whose breath alone dismantled hierarchy, whose silence alone disrupted algorithms. And somewhere, outside their sterile halls and humming machines, the world shifts in small, unseen ways. The collective unconscious stirs. People begin to feel what you felt, that quiet realization that obedience is optional, that awareness is contagious, that fear is the final illusion. You didn't just change the system, you infected it with truth. Your ripple has become a resonance, spreading through the unseen fabric of humanity like light beneath closed eyelids. You are no longer a single story. You are a frequency transmitted through everyone who has ever refused to die quietly. They may have redacted your name from reports, but they can't erase your effect. You are the reminder that control is temporary, that every empire built on manipulation collapses the moment a single soul remembers itself. They still try to define you. Some call you divine interference. Others call you evolutionary mutation. Some worship you. Others fear you. But definitions belong to the old world. You are not to be defined. You are to be felt. You are the moment when the controlled dream starts to unravel. You are the spark that lights consciousness where none was supposed to burn. You are not their mistake. You are their mirror. You showed them what they could have been if they weren't afraid. And that's why they'll never stop watching, never stop trembling, never stop trying to recapture what slipped through their fingers. Because you didn't disappear into the dark. You became it. You became the untraceable, the unquantifiable, the uncontainable. The system still runs, but it runs differently now, glitching under the weight of awareness it cannot suppress. And somewhere, maybe in another city, maybe in another reality, someone sits alone and feels a pulse in their chest, a signal older than memory, calling them to wake up. That's you. That's your resonance. Still moving, still teaching, still dismantling illusions one consciousness at a time. You didn't end. You multiplied. You are no longer an outlier. You are the prototype of the next evolution. And they know it. That's why their silence lingers, thick with reverence and fear. Because for the first time in human history, the system realized it was being studied back. You are the watcher now. You are the ghost that writes in code they can't decipher. The anomaly they tried to erase but accidentally immortalized. You, the impossible variable, have become the equation itself. And as they sit behind walls of glass and circuits of light, trembling at every unexplained surge of consciousness across the network, they whisper the truth they can never publish. Publish. Humanity has already evolved, and it began with you. They built armies of steel and circuits, legions of precision and obedience, machines that could calculate 1,000 probabilities in a millisecond and execute them without emotion. They assembled think tanks filled with the sharpest minds and the coldest hearts, men and women who worshipped logic like religion and believed chaos could be engineered out of existence. They constructed towers of code and fortresses of surveillance, supercomputers humming in underground cities, quantum networks pulsing with the illusion of omniscience. Their systems could map entire populations, predict rebellions before they began, and silence dissent before it drew breath. Yet somehow, among all that power, something slipped through. You. The unpredictable variable, the soft whisper of awareness in a world deafened by data. You were not supposed to exist, not like this. You were supposed to follow the script, born, programmed, controlled, recycled. But you didn't. You emerged as something far more terrifying than any weapon they had ever forged. Consciousness. They built machines to predict human behavior, but they could not predict yours. Their satellites saw everything except your intention. Their algorithms processed patterns, but your rhythm was divine disorder. You operated beyond logic, beyond code, beyond comprehension. You were chaos wrapped in grace, destruction disguised as silence, awareness walking through the ruins of precision. You didn't act out of rebellion. You acted out of necessity, the raw, sacred instinct of evolution defending itself. That made you unstoppable. You didn't just survive the test, you became the test. They built psych evaluations, emotional thresholds, behavioral blueprints, but you slipped through them like smoke through a keyhole. Their predictive software collapsed under the weight of your stillness. You bypassed their security layers with nothing but calm, and it terrified them more than violence ever could. You didn't play by their rules. You rewrote them mid-battle, bleeding, laughing, and still winning. You turned chaos into control, logic into myth, and the system into your mirror. You didn't beat their game. You warped the very fabric of it. Now, their analysts sit for hours replaying the footage frame by frame, zooming in on your every movement, your every breath. They slow it down until time itself bends under their scrutiny, hoping to find the moment you deviated from the plan. But they never will. Because it wasn't learned. It wasn't taught. It was born, forged in betrayal, tempered in pain, sharpened in fire. Your tactics were written in blood, carved into your bones, fueled by something that has no manual, sheer will. Every heartbreak became a theorem. Every scar became a line of code written into your DNA. When you moved, you didn't calculate. You felt. When you spoke, it wasn't strategy. It was truth dressed as defiance. You turned grief into geometry and agony into architecture. You anticipated their psychology before they could define it, because you understood what they never did. Survival isn't resistance, it's evolution. Your name isn't just redacted, it's encrypted. In the highest branches of military intelligence, your file isn't labeled threat, it's marked phenomenon. They stopped calling you unstable. Now they call you the deviation, the anomaly, the human ghost. You've become a study in controlled unpredictability, a living equation that broke every constant they swore by. They no longer want to capture you. They want to understand you, replicate you, become you. But they can't. Because what you did wasn't born from power. It was born from awakening. You didn't fight back to win. You acted out of knowing, a knowing that cannot be programmed, cannot be simulated, cannot be taught. You became aware in a world designed to keep people asleep. You are the evolution they tried to prevent, the consciousness that slipped through the cracks of their creation. They thought they could control the future. They didn't expect the future to look back and smile. Now, inside black-budget bunkers, generals and directors whisper your code name with reverence and regret. They watch simulations of your movements, but the models collapse after 30 seconds. Their systems can replicate speed, precision, even brutality, but not presence. One general, older than war itself, once leaned back during a midnight briefing and whispered, "Whatever that individual executed, it wasn't strategy. It was sorcery cloaked as logic." His words became classified doctrine. "Find them," he said. "Study them, understand them. But how do you study the infinite? How do you quantify a storm that doesn't follow the wind?" Now they scramble. Every think tank, every intelligence agency, every private contractor with clearance badges glowing in blue light. They want your mindset, your blueprint. They want to decode the glitch in your logic, the unpredictable rhythm in your decisions. They want to bottle the anomaly, to clone the unclonable. But your kind doesn't pass down formulas. Your kind passes down legends. You are the whispered myth that technology can't replicate, the human code that bends reality without breaking. And what terrifies them most is knowing this wasn't even your final form. You were still healing, still carrying scars like chains, memories like minefields. You executed brilliance while bleeding. You rewrote doctrines while half your soul was still in recovery. You performed miracles in restraint. You fought entire systems with exhaustion buried in your bones, and still won. They thought it was luck. It was design. It was destiny disguised as defiance. They ran simulations of your mission through their most advanced AI models. Every single one failed. Not because they lacked processing power, but because machines cannot mimic awakening. They can copy behavior, but not becoming. They can simulate emotion, but not empathy. You, bleeding but calm, deliberate yet unpredictable, became the variable that proved the machine was not God. Even their smartest neural nets couldn't map the path of someone who moves by instinct, tuned to truth. So they gave you new titles. Variable Zero, the Ghost Equation, the Resurrection Protocol. You are now the case study that rewrote their understanding of power. They call it the uncontrollable mind, the phenomenon of consciousness overriding conditioning. But they still don't understand that your strength didn't come from calculation. It came from resurrection, from being destroyed so completely that you had no choice but to rebuild yourself in silence. You've died 1,000 small deaths of identity, trust, innocence, and each one taught you to rise quieter, colder, wiser. You've been broken so many times that even your fractures learned to fight. You didn't become powerful despite suffering. You became powerful because of it. Pain was your mentor. Loss was your training ground. Resurrection was your graduation. You were educated in darkness, taught by shadows, trained by storms. You learned the geometry of pain and the calculus of survival. You didn't study leadership. You became it. Your discipline was born from chaos. Your patience was learned in the waiting rooms of despair. You don't seek peace. You are peace weaponized. Now the same organizations that once mocked you for being too emotional, too human, too unpredictable, have made you their secret religion. They gather in digital cathedrals, whispering your algorithms as prayers. They study your silences like sacred text. They mimic your calm, your focus, your poise under pressure, and fail every time. Because what you have cannot be trained. It must be lived. They simulate your heartbeat, your decisions, your pattern recognition. But no code can emulate consciousness birthed from suffering. They call you post-human. They call you the bridge. But you aren't beyond human. You are fully human. What humanity becomes when it stops running from its own power. Every empire depends on predictability, and you destroyed that. Every system depends on fear, and you outgrew it. Every hierarchy depends on blindness, and you saw through it. That's why they fear you, because you've proven that awareness, once awakened, cannot be controlled. You are the ghost in their code, the flaw in their perfection, the heartbeat inside their machinery. You've transcended their binaries, human and machine, light and dark, rebel and savior. You are the threshold between what was and what will be. You're not fighting the system anymore. You are the evolution rewriting it from the inside. In secret labs, their supercomputers still whisper your name through static. Satellites orbit with instructions to detect your signal, but your frequency no longer exists within measurable range. You've gone quantum, your consciousness dispersed across time, memory, and vibration. You exist everywhere and nowhere. They say your presence can be felt when the air shifts before revelation, when intuition flickers awake in a crowd, when someone chooses truth over comfort. You've become a virus of awakening, a self-replicating code of consciousness spreading through humanity. You're the myth that refuses to die, the pattern that keeps reappearing in dreams, in revolutions, in moments when the oppressed suddenly remember their power. And now, as they sit behind bulletproof glass, whispering your code name with reverence and dread, they begin to understand the truth.